Well, hello. I'm here with Dave Smith. Dave is a member of the Canadian Fencibles, a group that does War of 1812 reenacting. And he's also a member of his local branch of the United Empire Loyalist, Bay of Quinte. And Dave's been involved in something quite unique, and that's identifying graves and grave sites of War of 1812 veterans and then marking them with a marker, and then quite often having ceremonies to honor these veterans and the marking of their gravesite. So, welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Oh, a real pleasure. I've been wanting to get to this for quite some time. How about I turn it over to you, and then knowing me and my curiosity, I'll probably interrupt constantly with questions.
Sure, but please do, please do. So, yeah, thank you for having us. We've undertaken this, and I'll sort of talk about the journey. But as we were coming up to the 200th anniversary of the declaration of the War of 1812, myself and a colleague, Brant Zetterberg, that's involved with the reenactment unit as well. We thought it was important from where we live, because Brant and I are both descendants of people that served in both the Revolutionary War for the British and live on the Loyalist Parkway. And as well, many of their sons, and in some cases the same men, served later in the War of 1812. So as we approached the Bicentennial, we thought it was important to recognize and remember always. It's always about honoring those that have gone before us, and because we both have strong ties in that, we undertook some research. And on the anniversary, June 18th of 2012, we actually marked our initial 14 veterans that we were able to find. And there's literally hundreds in my backyard, which I've come to understand better now as we've been doing this quite a long. So initially we focused on the stretch of the eastern part of the Loyalist Parkway where I reside, and where Brant and I both had many UE ancestors that served in both periods.
So I'm just going to point out, Dave, our audience is an international audience.
Okay.
So a lot of people might not be familiar. So the part of Canada Dave's talking about is known as Eastern Ontario. So you're kind of at as Lake Ontario ends and opens up into the St. Lawrence River. So and then the Loyalist Parkway runs along the St. Lawrence. Yeah, hopefully I got that right.
Yeah, you did, and largely what happened is that post the revolution, the British had surveyed the areas running well, initially the Royal Townships in around the Cornwall region, and then ultimately into Kingston and the areas to the west of there, where they then proceeded to send all the loyal subjects that had made their way to the Canadas. And in my case, a lot of my ancestors spent the winter in Sorel, or what is present day Sorel, and then they would come by bateau and to their new homes west of Kingston, and ultimately would make their lives there again. So, and a lot of this is around the 1780s, so 1784 through to 1786. One of the great things that we found during our journey here in doing the research on the veterans, we've unearthed some really amazing stories, and I hope someday to put this together in a book. But we've just identified these three gentlemen were all part of our initial markings that we did in 2012. And the stories start to come to life, Tom. This is where it's really interesting, and we find Charles Dollar. And as I did some base work on Charles, I found out he was born in Germany, and he came over to the Canadas with the Watteville Regiment, of course, which came towards the end of the conflict into the Canadas. I think they come in around late 1813, early 1814. And he's buried quite close to me in what's called the Warkworth Cemetery. And he died on November 22nd, 1856. But where the story really gets interesting, of course, he served the British here in the Canadas and was at Oswego and Lundy's Lane, arguably the bloodiest conflict of the war. And there's a little picture of his headstone here on the Frelick Road where we are. But before serving in the Swiss Regiment of Duatteville for the British, Charles Dollar had been serving the French Army. Yeah. So he was serving Napoleon. So I haven't been able to substantiate it, but I believe very strongly he was probably taken prisoner at one point and given the choice of, as many were, either sort of re-enlisting with the British or, sitting in a prison hulk somewhere. So very interesting story to come to find out. And when we marked his grave, we were very fortunate to track down his fourth great granddaughter, who lives in the area. And the Dollar name, he did a lot of carpentry work and things, and several of the buildings that in our region he worked on. So a really great story. And again, we hope to do some more work down the road here to try to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. So again, as you get into this, we unearth some really amazing things. One probably a little closer to your heart is we found Richard Thomas Fuller. He was a major in the 41st Regiment of Foot. He died in the 17th December in 1813, and near as we can tell, he had taken ill on his journey overland, and I guess by chance, had ended up in the Adolphustown area where he was being cared for. And unfortunately, he passed, and he's buried in the Trumper Cemetery, which is an old UE cemetery, actually, that was abandoned and there's a lot of really good reclamation work that goes on in the area where we're working on cemeteries. And so it's pretty rough. Unfortunately, there's no stone for Richard Thomas Fuller, but like any of these gentlemen, if I find them and I can find proof that they're buried there, even if we do not find the stone, we tried to add them to the Gravesite project so that they're not forgotten. They're listed in the database that I know you're familiar with, that started to be put together just at the start of the Bicentennial.
Well, that's fascinating for me, because also Fuller is someone I want to do some work on. There's lots of letters written by him in the archives. He was an older officer. I think he was considered to be overweight, generally poor health, and he complained a lot. So being passed over for promotions and postings and various things. So some of his letters border on being humorous. So
interesting. Sounds like a lot of reenactors too that I know.
Us accepted, of course.
Okay. And then one of the really ones that's close to me, because I'm executive director of the UEL Park and Center in Adolphustown. And part of that park was actually the Hagerman homestead, where they were known to have apples and an apple wharf. But Nicholas Hagerman was sort of local boy, does good, right? And he was a captain in one of the flank companies of the Lennox Flank Company, and he was appointed major of that in May of 1813. And again, I can take you to the spot where I'm pretty sure he's buried. There's a plot there that we've witched that's not marked as part of the UE cemetery that's there. And we're pretty certain there are a number of family members of the Hagermans buried there. But he died in Adolphustown in 1819, fairly young, 58 years of age. I suspect, like many men that were 58, they had very hard lives. And I know in my own family's case, they're broken men in their 50s, right? They have a lot of factors going on, whether it be wounds and things from the conflicts, or in fact, alcohol was a problem, certainly with many of them, right? Many would, by definition today, be alcoholic and just trying to survive was a thing. But he was quite a good local boy, served some things. More importantly, I guess in the context of the war, he was adjutant to Morrison at Chrysler's.
Wow.
And so, there it is again, local boy goes good. One of the pictures here, the lower picture is actually us doing the November remembrance every year. We go prior to going to the cenotaph at Fort Wellington for the present day service, but we do a 9 a.m. service at Chrysler's Farm. And I know you've been there. It's a really spiritual place, right? It's really, and you just need to know that you go and you remember, and it's a really good day, right? I always get sort of goosebumps when I'm there. Can't explain it, don't need to. I just know it's a good thing that we go and remember every November 11th at 9 a.m.
For sure.
So as part of my local piece, I present to a lot of local municipalities and some of the other groups. So these names may not mean a lot to some of our people on the today, but from our perspective, these are all very local names to me. In fact, there's 2 of my family names on there, and ultimately all these gentlemen, we've marked somebody with this name in the last little while. So both Addington and Lennox provided a lot of men to the flank companies. So they were young, fit farmers, if you will. And I know Brock made good use of them at different times, and many also served in IMOC. I've found some great stories there where a group actually that are all buried at St. Paul's in Kingston, which I'm doing some research on right now. There was 4 or 5 buddies that clearly grew up together. And the next thing you know, they're all following their one friend into the IMOC and see action in a lot of places during the war. So,
I'll interrupt, and then IMOC is an acronym for Incorporated Militia of Upper Canada. So as the war went on, you moved away from regular militia to more. You had fencible units like
professionally
unit,
trained
Canadian
troops, right?
Yeah,
very true.
And then you had incorporated units where really they acted as full-time soldiers and were trained and equipped as such. So
yes, and of course your 5 provincial fencible regiments were all in the establishment and all paid and trained accordingly, right? And saw major action during the conflict. So interesting enough, this is the one thing that ties it to the United Empire Loyalists. Where I live, of course, the area was very, very loyal for a number of generations, and these names all exist today. I know Briscoes, I know Hollies, I know Lockwoods, I know Mackenzies. They're all my neighbors and people that live in the region. But interesting enough, as we got into literally my backyard in the village of Bath, which was originally Ernesttown after Prince Ernest, George's, I think, 7th son. I may have that wrong. All these gentlemen here that we marked at St. John's and what was Bath United, originally the Methodist Church, all of them served in the Revolution prior to serving again in 1812. So, there's some great stories here, and I don't want to spoil it, but I just say we're gonna put it to print one of these days here when I can find some time. And at the same time, we started to mark the burial grounds with United Empire Loyalist plaques, and we chose to go this way. A lot of the work with the Bay of Quinte, it's important. We see them as cultural heritage sites. And so we've started this process over the last number of years. I think we've marked probably about 8 or 9 cemeteries, and it's amazing now. We're actually have a little tour going where people want to go to these places because they're in search of family or they're in search of the story that around it. And so St. John's is a very old church within the village, and again, what is now Bath United as well too. And so we mark them. They have an amazing Canada Day parade every year in the village, and we participated for many years. And so this was in July of 2019. That's just a little shot of us there. This is Colin Mackenzie's gravesite, and you can see there's a UEL flag that was produced by the Correctional Services Group at Millhaven Penitentiary. There's the 1812 Upper Canada Preserve marker. And then I've been doing signs up for each of these veterans and to mark their rank and whatnot. And it shows the Upper Canada Preserve Medal, and Brant Zetterberg and I did some work on that. So interesting enough, Mackenzie was a drummer, and you'll have to forgive me, I can't remember the regiment right now, but a drummer in the Revolution at the age of 10. And he later would become a lieutenant in the 1st Regiment of Addington Militia and serve in 1812. So there's a lot of these stories where I am, and especially when we get to one of the other cemeteries here where a lot of my family are buried. You know, there's 10, 11 gentlemen that all served in both conflicts.
And then the Upper Canada Preserved, interestingly, we recently posted a video on that because City of Toronto, their historic branch, holds the 3 known surviving copies of that. So that's a fascinating story in itself. That's
great. I didn't know that. I knew there was several. I didn't know there was 3. And for those, I guess, that don't know the story, ultimately the government at the time, whether you want to call it the family compact or whatever, decided to melt down, as I understand it, the remaining metals and kept the silver for themselves. Is there something to that?
Yeah, it's in the video. Richard Gerard does a great job describing it. But I guess, considering how many veterans there were, that they didn't produce all that many medals, and then they got mired into the details about who was deserving of a medal, how were they going to issue them, and they could never come to any kind of a clear idea around that, and the easiest thing was to trash the project. So,
wow. Okay. Well, I guess it's a good thing that some of them are getting their markers today. I'll touch on that a little later. So in the project in Bath, one of my initial projects that we were on, we actually identified 10 veterans between the 2 cemeteries. Obviously, we could not find the stones. We could only find 4 stones. This stone here is at Davis Hawley, who was a captain in the Addington Militia. Davis's stone was actually 18 inches down, and the people that care for that cemetery were able to locate it in the Hawley plot. So subsequently now it's been properly preserved and put in rails and set up and correctly repaired. So you know, I know some people struggle with that when they're below the ground, but in this case, they've been able to reclaim some stones. But again, we marked everybody that we found. We had proof they were buried there. We just couldn't find the stones, or they were underground. So it's important that they all get remembered. And obviously, we were just talking about the marker for those people that may not have seen it. It's got the lion and the beaver, and on the one side, and then of course the eagle on the other, with a picture of the Niagara Gorge, as I understand it, and then it says Upper Canada Preserve. So
yeah, that's the Niagara River. So I believe that's Lake Erie in the background and Lake Ontario in the foreground. And then there was actually a couple variations on this. I like this one, which was an early proof. So
yes,
right under the lion's paw, you see there's a line.
Yes.
So that was a fault in the original strike, or the
okay.
At the die. And then there was a newer version done, and they actually named the river and the lakes, and it's a lot more cluttered. So of the 2 versions, the one on the marker is the one I prefer.
Yeah, it's to say it's yeah, it tells the story, that's for sure. So during COVID, we felt it was important that we continue the work. And one of our gentlemen who is now an ensign with us, he was a member of the congregation at Cataraqui United Church, and so one of the oldest cemeteries in the area of city of Kingston. So we sort of veered off the Parkway, but closer to Kingston, which was really ground zero for us. And ultimately we went in there and started to do some work and research there with our friend Will Vanderhelm. And in September, and this is interesting because you'll see we had a social distancing event, and amazingly enough, I have no issues in getting turnouts of good size with our unit. Our unit on paper is probably 50 people if you include the music and everybody that's involved, and to get out 20 plus 25 plus people during the pandemic, it's easy to do so. And again, I think a lot of people take away it's a very spiritual day, and we get a lot out of it, and we just know it's some good work. So this is just a picture of some of the people that were assembled in September of 20. And as you know, I have a infection control background, so I made sure everybody was well cleaned and disinfected for the day. So
yeah, and I'm not sure if it was this one, but you had a run of them, eh? And
yeah.
I know I've watched a couple that were being streamed online. So
Yeah, this was one of the ones that ended up being shared through the UEL branch, and it's just it's a challenge, but I think it gives people an idea of what we're trying to achieve and trying to remember. So
yeah,
very good. And there's another sort of shot of where we were within the cemetery and had things set up. Purdy, this is Jesse Purdy here, and actually there's two Purdy's buried there, and Jesse and his wife are there in Cataraqui, and again both and his father was there, buried there as well, who also served. So it was a great day. It was a great day for the congregation. And even though there's been some things that have gone on since the cemetery is protected, and we're actually this June, after much work with the municipality, we're going to be able to put up our UE sign there on June the 12th, prior to our major Loyalist event in Adolphustown this year. We're on the Monday, which is landing day in Kingston for those that where a lot of the Loyalists arrived on in 1784. We'll be unveiling the UE sign here at Cataraqui. So we're looking forward to see that project through to completion. Now we're heading a little more west, back out on the Parkway, and this is really home base for me. I have my second, third, and fourth grandfathers are buried here in the Lutheran Union Cemetery, which was originally Lutheran Cemetery donated by the Amy family, who were all members of Jessup's Rangers. And then subsequently, a little later on, that was at the time the emergence of cemeteries. And this is probably the only oldest documented one within Loyalist Township. I think the first burial on record is 1789. And again, we marked 10 veterans here. This was a very, I guess the best word I could use, spiritual day. You see the picture on the right there, possibly. The ground is very uneven. Unfortunately, I've had the duty of putting many family members in there over the years. You pretty well need to be a billy goat to come up the side of the hill. But we post a man by each of the during the ceremony by each of the things. It was a really haunting picture. As Major Moore went around, and again, where we always can too, we try to get family there. So in this case, I had many family there for these days of these people. So the actual family did the unveiling of the marker and tried to involve them, and it's really a good thing. Interesting enough, again, Jacob Stover. Stover's a very strong name within the region. Jacob was a corporal in Jessup's Rangers prior to being the sergeant in Addington, during the War of 1812. So once again, one of these men that served in both conflicts. making a new home and then having it at threat, 30 years later again. Must have been a very tumultuous time for them. And again, a couple more examples of the stones. Some of them in really rough shape here. But I have some great work through OGS that people that did cemetery surveys 50, 60, 70 years ago. So the stones aren't there, but there's a lot of good work that I can go to research and find people. So actually this fall, we're marking 2 in the Centerville United Church Cemetery, one which is actually my 4th great grandfather, and he served in both. And at the end of the day, we're able to find the second man. There was no storm, but because of these surveys that were done, we're able to locate his site. So very important stuff. And now one of the good things that's happened as a result of this work is people come back, people engage, people are cleaning stones appropriately. That's because the people do things sometimes and can damage it. But there's been a real interest again in getting people out to do some work in these environments and care for them, which they need to be. And again, we also marked that same weekend, and we went into Adolphustown, where the UEL Park is. There's a memorial cemetery there. Again, some of the names that all in that region still exist today. The Church, Crawfords, Hagermans, Hollies, Rutans, there's all relatives and present day descendants in the region. And again, this is at St. Albans, which is now come out of the diocese, but it's being preserved, and Major Peter Dorling. And so a lot of these amazing stones and stories to be told. And this is just actually at the top of the hill at the entrance to the UEL Park. So, and this is the side of the wall, very similar to what you would see at Chrysler's, where the province, when they did the original cemetery and put the fence up in 1884 for what was a major event at the time. The premier, the military, they were all there. They placed a number of the stones in the wall. And so interesting enough, there's 4 1812 veterans there in the wall at Adolphustown, and a father and son as well too. We also were involved, I think you were aware of this, with Private John Baker, who was marked.
This was done in conjunction with Sackett's Harbor too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. There were Sackett's, and the UE were presented as part of their interactive conference that they did virtually. And again, we did some work there involved in remembering Baker. This is interesting stuff for me, because I got in it, and we're pretty certain that Baker was part of what was an all-black pioneer unit that were part of the 104th. So really incredible stuff. Right. And these men did just yeoman work, and I've turned out several times over the years as a pioneer, and I'm always amazed and fascinated by their gear and all the work that they did.
Well, especially the 104th and their march. Like you read like Lukatour's journal, and he talks about the pioneers on snowshoes in advance of everyone, and getting to an area and basically hacking spots out of the forest and building rough lean-tos for the men to sleep in once they got up to that point.
Just incredible. And I mentioned that, and thank you for bringing it up, because we did the last leg of the 104th march from Gananoque down to our present day RMC, Royal Military College of Canada, and which at the time would have had the stone frigate there, and of course the Navy was there, and we did it in an ice storm, 200 years to the day, and we preceded the regular army, which marched it as well with us, and did the last leg. And I would tell you, of all the things we did in the Bicentennial, it was the most spiritual event that we did, and the takeaway was amazing. And I still get sort of chills when we did it. And we had all our winter gear on, our great coats, and we slung our snowshoes over our back and then packs, and on we went into Kingston, and it was a great day.
Well done.
Some of the 2022 projects that I work on, and usually I'm in about 18 months in advance, researching and trying to do the work and enlisting help of friends like Brant and members of our UEL group. We did some work in Mississippi Mills last year, Warkworth Stone Cemetery, which is a UE1, and Cramahe Hill Cemetery, which is in Morganton, just south of Warkworth. And if you ever get a chance to go, it's again one of the most spiritual places you'll ever visit. It's surreal when you get there. It's so serene and peaceful. This is interesting one. John Donohoe or Donohue Senior was a member of the King's Eighth, and his family, and this has happened to me quite often now, people are coming, they have part of the information, and they're asking for help to try to mark their ancestor. And so I've been undertaking several projects. I've got 2 or 3 more on the go where they have enough base information and they may not know how to deal with the municipality or how to get through the politics of it. So I've been trying to help them. And this was a family project up in the Carleton Place, Almont area. And it was just a great day for the family. I found his stone actually in the middle of nowhere in what was, I guess, a decommissioned burial ground. And it was in really rough shape. And apparently the historical group had originally done the work there, but it was in need of a lot of TLC. Well, post the event, the municipality, who were great to work with, because, you first contact them and you tell them what you're trying to do, and they go, "You're doing what?" And, you educate them as to what and the reasoning behind it and their history a lot of times, because they may be detached from it, and you talk to them, and subsequently they went in and rebuilt all the stone pillars and did a whole bunch of work, and it looks beautiful now. So that was pretty gratifying to see that people care still, and they just need to brought to their attention. This is actually a copy of Donohue's service record with the 8th, which is always interesting, right? You get into this, and it'll talk about his parish and where he was, and ultimately I think it's Edmund Glover is the general that signs his paperwork. But it's always interesting, and this is an example of some of the proof that I require 3 forms of proof to put them in, as to who they are, where they're buried, their record of service, if that's possible, some of these other things as we put things together for the Gravesite project. So just an example of some of the things that we do. This is Warkworth, and again, a great day. And I'm so thankful to the members of our unit that all come out in strength to participate, always there. And I would tell you a critical piece of it is the music. And we're very fortunate. I have Drum Major Mike Putnam, who's actually Reverend Mike Putnam for the United Church of Canada. And Mike's always there sounding like 10 men. And Hayden Landholt is with Fort Henry presently, but we have Graham Lindsay there as well too. And we can always count on Mike's son, who's pictured in the center here. This is Max, and Max does the drill better than all the fencibles. If I could duplicate Max in many ways, we would have the perfect regiment. But of course, the history lives on with our children. So I think someday Max is destined to be both major in the King's Royal Yorkers and the Canadian Fencibles. So it's a few years down the road, but it's always a pleasure having them there. Stone is an interesting cemetery south of Warkworth, a couple of kilometers. And again, for us that do several periods, the one on the right here where Major Moore is marking is for Michael Kreiderman. Michael Kreiderman was a member of the King's Royal Yorkers under Sir John Johnson, 1st Battalion. And again, he was also served in the War of 1812, as did 3 of his sons. So they're all at rest there. And again, a very amazing place, and sort of in the middle of nowhere. And it was really gratifying. In this particular case, I think we had over probably 200 people there as guests that day, on looking and participating in the ceremonies. So a very strong following to the region, and I guess an attachment to the people, to their history and their family's history. And then Cramahe Hill, again, we mentioned it, and I would be remiss if I didn't call out my friends, Ron Phillips in the Glengarry Light Infantry. We marked Garrett Dingman that day. Garrett was a member of the Glengarry Light Infantry Fencibles. So I unfortunately didn't get a picture of Ron at the graveside, but again, where we can determine, regiments and who they served, if it's, we try to make sure we engage, whether it be Incorporated Militia of Upper Canada or Glengarry's or whoever, we try to make sure we have a representation there that day. That's an interesting stone. I don't know how great the visual is, but that's an example of a stone where people came in meaning well and tried to clean the stone and used materials that were too aggressive. And unfortunately, it's really done a job on the stone.
I was going to say, yeah, it looks like it's whatever was on it was obliterated. Like
literally in this case. So it's quite sad, and that's why if people get into it, we've researched it over time, and I have a really good gentleman that is involved with the Masonic Lodge up there. His name is Troy Easter, and Troy and I do a lot of work on a lot of the stones before the events, if we have permission, and we can do that. And he has it down to a real science. So you want to avoid this.
Yeah, I think I've seen some before and after pictures you posted.
Yeah. It's and you got to be it's a patient process, right? You have to take, interesting enough, this is one of the stones that we've done some work on, and it's Sergeant Robert Clark, who's with the Addington Militia. And we're going to be marking his stone this September at the Moscow United Church Cemetery, which is, again, the middle of God's country, north of the Amherst area. So 2023, we're going to be viewing a UEL sign at Cataraqui. Centerville will be a very special day for me. My fourth great-grandfather, who was member of the 2nd Battalion of the King's Royal Yorkers, and his name is Weiss, originally Weiss at that time, Weis, and then it became Weiss, and then Weiss present day. We're going to be marking him with both, which is interesting, with the UE marker as well too. Milligan Pioneer Cemetery is just literally a stone's throw from the United Church Cemetery, very close to the Orange Lodge that still's there and active, and that houses Sergeant Jacob Rombo. And for me, it's really interesting because all these names, they're still, again, there today. I played fastball against 100 Rombos, and they were all big, strong farmers that could hit the ball a country mile. And so this is their direct ancestor, and he's buried in Milligan. And then we'll be coming back to two special places: Moscow, which is not far away, and the Hoffman Cemetery, which is a UE one, literally right across the street. And again, some great stories that have come out of there, and really journeys in trying to find people. I've had little notes and things, and I think about the Hoffman one. It was a Vaness, and it says he's buried at Petworth. Well, Petworth is way around the corner, close to a farm that I used to live on. And at the end of the day, nowhere near Hoffman. But in the end, through detective work, we were able to find him here in the Hoffman Cemetery. Took about 8 months, but we did find him, and so always gratifying when you can add them to the list and do that. So that's what's on the burner for this year. What's coming up? Well, there's a couple things, and I know you've challenged me, and I accept the challenge. We're already starting to work on Perth, which, as many of us know here, is probably the largest concentration of Napoleonic and 1812 veterans. All were in the military mile at Perth. And so there's many things there. We did something very special there in 2009 and rededicated a cemetery, that the old burial ground that had been damaged. But we're going to go back, and I'm going to work very closely with you to make it a Crown Forces event and get some of the people to experience some of these great days that are very spiritual and important. We're going to do that, and there's some anniversaries coming up, so we'll determine that. But maybe 24, maybe 25. But I've already started. Two of my Fencible colleagues, one in Perth, one in Kemptville, have already started to be feet on the ground, and we started to work there locally. So I'm hopeful to bring something positive to you here, in the near future.
And then I'll point out for our audience, so Perth in Ontario, I'm exaggerating, I suppose, saying it's in the Ottawa area, but a
It's close enough.
reasonable drive to Ottawa. So it was known as a military settlement. So post-war of 1812, post Napoleonic Wars, the thinking was Upper Canada was sparsely settled, very close proximity to the US. In the event that there was ever an outbreak of hostilities again, what if you had all these veterans from regular units settled in Upper Canada, and then you could quickly call them up and have highly effective and well-trained and experienced militia units. So in Perth, there's just an amazing collection of not just War of 1812, but also Napoleonic War veterans. So Dave and I were looking at there's a list or registry of everyone and what units they belong to. I think it's in the Ontario archives, so that'd be a great resource as well. I know it's something I want to dig into more. So
yeah, so we look forward to that, and then it'd be a special time to do it. And there's actually overflow you mentioned about, but on into the Ottawa region and Richmond and places like that. And I'm again hearing from people that get my name from sources, and they'll come to me and they'll say, okay, we know where these people are buried. And a couple recently don't have stones, but the project is they're hoping to put a stone up for them, right? And then then we could mark them and do all these things. So there's some great work that's happening at the grassroots level. It's interesting, Tom. I'd be remiss to tell, when we go on these journeys and we think what who settled an area or what's going on. The one that you mentioned, because of the Napoleonic piece, I have to tell you, I because of our Warkworth work, I presented to the historical group up there, and they're all very supportive, and they were a lot of the reason we had such a great turnout for Warkworth and Stone and Cramahe Hill. But interesting enough, when I get up there to Campbellford, I find a whole bunch of Royal Naval officers that were all very prominent and served in the Napoleonic Wars. And again, they must have been a connection, could have been buddies, could have been married brother-in-laws, who knows, but they all settled in the Campbellford area. Wow. So there's a whole other group and story that's come up that as a result of some of the work. So there's more things we're going to do there. And I'm working very closely with a gentleman, Bill Russell, who was part of our UEL branch and Kawarth's UEL branch. And so, there's more to come down the road, right? And then there's a couple of indigenous pieces up there too that we're working on to potentially tie them into, doing a day up there when we do it. And again, there's always stuff close to home for me. One of the ones I started on about 5 years ago, and I'm still struggling with it. A lot of it has to do with the municipality. Some of it has to do with some of the people overseeing it. But the lower burial ground at St. Paul's in Kingston is probably the oldest within the city of Kingston. But if anybody knows the history of that church and whatnot, it's a cemetery on top of a cemetery on top of a cemetery. So you have a whole host of veterans in there. Are they on top? Are they in the middle? Are they down below? They've started to do some work below. It's such a vast project. So I don't know that we're ever going to get there, but I'm hopeful that at some point they will allow us to even if we can't necessarily mark, there are several we could mark on the upper level, and then we can prove that certain people are buried there. We just may never find their stones. So it's an important site, and it's one that in the back of my mind here that I'm going to continue to work on as long as I can work on these types of projects.
That reminds me, I don't know if you've ever been there in Quebec City. I think it's on Rue Saint Jean,
Yes.
just outside of the city gates. There's the Protestant burying ground. Yeah,
Yep.
and they talk about, it's a fairly small chunk of ground, but they talk
Small,
about
it is small.
the thousands that are buried there. So that's what come to mind as you're describing, that Kingston site. So
Yeah, and as I say, it's right across, literally across the street from the armory there too, and Artillery Park, as it's called today, and all the things that lie in Kingston's, foundations, right? And again, we touched on this earlier, but in 2012, the feds did institute a program. It was quite expensive at the time, and it wasn't always feasible to help. But post we've been able to work with some good people, Lynn Downer, and some people that support us in this. And again, this is the Gravesite project listing. I've got some more proofs and things to update shortly, but it's a growing database. And I think by the end of this year, our total is going to be up over 60 veterans. So we feel very privileged to be involved in this. We, as I say, we consider it our sort of honor and duty, if we could use those words, to remember these men and to mark them and do the work. So I encourage anybody, if they get a chance, to go down this way with their family, or to get involved. We're always willing to help. And this is just some of our project partners to date that we work with, some of the municipalities, some of the branches as well. I'm involved with the Loyalist Parkway Association and some of the municipalities. So that's every time we do a project, the list grows, and it's important to remember. So that's basically what we've been up to for the last couple of years.
Oh, that's awesome, Dave. And then I guess I can relate, because I've done this so many times. What started off as a would be a cool thing to do becomes, I don't know, kind of a consuming obsession.
Yeah, that would be a fair comment. It does, and but I would tell you, I find it's very soothing for me. I go down the rabbit hole, and I try to find some times, because, as you know, we have very busy professional careers and things going on, especially during the pandemic. And it was the greatest thing for me to get involved and discover these people, and to also feed off the energy of the other people that are working with you to help find them. And then when you can involve family and things, which is really important, on the site and whatnot, it becomes just, a really great day. And I won't go too deep into it, but we all know people that feel and sense things. And some comments have been told to me over the years after we've done these that just make the hair stand up on the back of your neck, and you just know that you're doing a good thing.
Yeah, well, I applaud you and your group. Job well done. And then I'll put some of the links and things we discussed also in the video details to make it more accessible for people to follow up on what you've been doing. So thank you, Dave. I
Thank you.
really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Okay, well, thanks, and I look forward to seeing you on the field sometime this year.
Absolutely. I look
All
forward
right.
to it as well.